Hello and welcome back, guys. We're now starting a new story, Deku the Shadow Monarch, written by Mightiest Battle. You can find author's profile link in the description. Let's begin Deku the Shadow Monarch, a dark hero Deku story. 1A Girls and Mirko HRM, main ship semi-good Toga. Toa won't be as crazy as she is in the anime or manga. Warning, other people can see the player's screen and dungeon gate and use gear if he gives it to them. Deku will also be slightly perverted. There will be NCST, kidnapping, brainwashing gear, impregnant, and death. This story will be OOC of the anime itself. Many things will be changed as now you will see a dark Deku like none other. All Might killed All for One before dealing the wound to his stomach. Thus, he never looked for a student to inherit One for All. Without that event, it would give BRTH to a Deku, far worse than All for One. P.S. If anyone wants to see Chapter 2, it's already up on my Patreon free to view for the first 3 days. 12 years ago Izuku lay in the woods, burns on his skin after another beating from his one-time best friend, Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku did not want the pain to come back if he moved again. As he lay there, he cursed the world he was born into. All because he was born without a quirk. If only he had a quirk, he'd have shown Bakugo a reason to fear him. These were the thoughts that went through Izuku's mind before he blacked out from the pain. In Izuku's mind, when Izuku's eyes opened again, the first thing he noticed was that the pain was gone. Then he also noticed he was in a throne room of some kind. Large stone columns with gold trim along the roof and a huge gold chandelier. Izuku stooped, turned his head, and saw a throne with a man sitting on it. He had shadow-like armor on. It was black and purple. He stood up, and he was tall. With a handsome face, women would love to see. He was also muscular with gray eyes, sharp facial features, and black hair with bangs that dangled down to his eyes. His eyes were glowing purple, with a smirk on his face. The man walked right up to Izuku and hummed as he looked down at him. "Ichem, I see." Izuku looked at him as he kneeled and looked into his eyes. "So this is my reincarnation. Granted, this me will be so much more dark than I was. To think that my reincarnation was the weakest again, even in another dimension. Well, I guess I can help and give you a few years of free growth. I'll give you 1% of my full power just so your body can start developing rapidly. But, I'll make all these seem like a dream. Make sure they fear the Shadow Monarch." Izuku, not knowing what he was talking about, watched as he placed his right hand on his head. Once he did, Izuku blacked out. Present time Izuku sighed as he stood up from his bed and smiled when he saw himself in the mirror. He was tall for his age, standing at a height of 6'7", and his well-muscled frame was the envy of many his age, with a few faded scars on his face. As he looked at himself, he couldn't help but think back on how he had rocked his school and the doctor when he suddenly had a quirk that everyone thought was an extreme, super physical enhancement quirk. He quickly became famous among everyone as he grew in power so rapidly that even before he asked, he had a recommendation for UA's hero course by heroes who'd seen him training. They all sent videos, and almost the whole nation knew about him. His power was so similar to All Might's that some people asked if they were related. Izuku laughed as he remembered how Bakugo was destroyed when the Deku crushed him in middle school. The Deku had crushed his hands, making his quirk miss fires and destroying his hopes of being a hero. What made it worse for Bakugo was that he started the fight and it was recorded and it was clear he attacked him 3 times before he attacked back. Even when the pros and cops showed up at the school, Bakugo was arrested and sent to juvenile hall. He'd broken the law by attacking someone with his quirk with the intent to kill, given how he talked. Izuku wished he'd gotten to take Bakugo's shadow, as his quirk was powerful, but he knew he'd have to kill him. But, Izuku had only killed the dungeon monsters from his earned keys. He had over 100 shadows from goblins, red wolves, and another humanoid monster. As well as 20 powerful quirk users. He wished to raise more of the bosses, but none were as strong as his knight. Flashback, 2 years ago Izuku had just finished his daily quest. Izuku wiped his face off as a new blue screen appeared in front of his face. Along with the normal rewards, there was a weapon reward. Raisin's blade. Izuku agreed to the rewards. Then, a sword appeared in his right hand. It was warm to the touch. Izuku looked at the description. Raisin's blade is made by sharpening the enchanted horn that shoots up from a raisin's back. You can feel the heat pulsing within as if fierce flames could erupt. It's a rare class weapon with a fire element, with an attack stat between 50 and 1100. Its HP was 50 to 1650. Its precision was from 0 to 1250. This sword feels good in the hand. But why did I get a weapon reward? Plus the E-rank keys. I have 10 of them now. What are they used for? Izuku summoned an E-rank key and looked at it. It was light purple and resembled a key from the 17th century. He sat it down and set the key down before he opened his stat screen. Level 7 HP 890 STR 70 MP 88 Vit 59 AGL 42 int 90 cents 30 available points 40 skills Level 1 Izuku sighed before he put the sword in the inventory. Then he looked at the key and picked it up before he noticed a lock in the middle of his door. Izuku hummed before putting the key away, and the lock vanished. Okay, I should have guessed the keys would go to a lock. But, they only show now. Is it because I have a weapon now? Izuku then looked back at the available points. Best to go ahead and use them. I can add 6 to each of my stats. I'm well above anyone my own age, and I've got experience from defeating the other people who try to attack me with my self-defense quest. Izuku hummed as he closed the screen after putting the key away. Best not to play with something I don't understand. But I'll never know what happens if I don't take the risk. Izuku resummoned the key and his sword. Izuku walked over to the lock and inserted the key. Back to present he'd torn his way through an E-ranked goblin dungeon. He killed the hobgoblin boss after almost 2 hours of fighting. He walked into that dungeon a level 7 and back out a level 12. With 2 new skills. Crushing Blow and Cutting Rush. He opened his stat. Level 42 HP 10980 STR 750 MP 3310 Vit 489 AGL 392 int 410 cents 900 available points 18 skills Level 5, Crushing Blow Level 4, Cutting Rush Level 6, Vital Strike Level 4, Fatal Strike Level 9, Mana Manipulation. After looking them over, the armor he had on. It was a set of leather armor that boosts his overall defense with added boosts to his MP and HP. He was glad it was invisible. Izuku also checked a few records of pro hero records. He hadn't fought against a pro hero, but he was sure that at this point, he could easily take a rookie pro hero. But, a pro with a few years of real combat under their belt, it'd be a death match, that much he was sure of. And that villain he had to fight 2 weeks ago. Knock knock, Izuku, dinner is ready. Izuku smiled, knowing his plan for his mother would start soon. He closed the screen as he readied himself for what he would do tonight. Okay mom, I'll be out in a minute. His voice was sweet, but what he had planned wasn't. He knew he'd have to use force initially but knew how to make her do what he wanted. He knew he was going down a dark path, but he long ago decided that this world would pay, and so would his mother. She only believed in him once she saw he had power. Now he was home for a week for summer vacation, and she'd taken a week off to be with him. He looked at a box he'd used a shadow with a portal quirk to gather items he would use this week. Before walking out, he grabbed a bag with a few small red pills in them. At the same time, he used a goblin shadow to take the box to his mother's room. He wasn't going to break her on the first night. That would be no fun. He just wanted to plant a seed he'd work with. Well, best to get started. Izuku walked over to the door and opened it to see the small 2-bedroom apartment. He hid the small bag in his pocket. He'd been slowly moving the money he'd been making into his mother's hands. Getting the money into her bank account or extra cash into her purse was difficult. But now they had new furniture, better food, new clothes, and his secret purchases using his shadows. Izuku, is something wrong? Izuku looked over at his mother and smiled as he looked at her. She was a little shorter than he was and was dressed in a t-shirt and jean shorts with large and circular eyes. Her hair and eyes are green but slightly darker than her son's. Her hair is straight and shoulder length, with a small and spiky ponytail at the back. Her chest was a large double D cup with a heart-shaped but with thick hips. Izuku saw she had placed steaming tea on the table as she readied the plates. I quickly got a pill out and snapped it before he dropped half of it into his mother's cup. He didn't want her unresponsive. Izuku, come over and get your katsudon. Izuku smiled as he walked over and grabbed his large bowl of katsudon. He then walked back over to the table and sat down. They sat down and started to head, and Izuku smiled as he watched her take a drink of the tea. Izuku took a few bites of the food, and all he had to do was wait. About 20 minutes into the meal, he saw her looking dizzy and her face flushed. Smiling, Izuku set his chopsticks down and stood up. You look ready to fall asleep, Mom. Why don't I help you to bed? Inko nodded as Izuku helped her and slowly walked her to her bedroom door. When he opened the door, he smiled when he saw the box at the foot of the bed. Izuku helped her onto the bed, and while she was still half out of it, she ran his hand down her back. His hand grazed her butt, seeming to make her jump, but when she tried to look back, her head started to phase up again. Inko just figured she imagined it as if this was her sweet Izuku's son. There was no way her son would touch her butt. As she went to turn over, she froze as she felt a hand on her butt, and it tapped it a few times before it was pulled away. She turned to look at him, but her mind wouldn't clear up. She decided that she was just imagining, as she knew it had been quite some time since she had any attention like that. But she didn't notice her son pushed the box under her bed. Now, it was time for him to go and see his girlfriend Toga, who was waiting for him so they could go hunting. 1 hour later, Izuku pulled up at her family home on his blue Honda Goldwing. A bike he'd bought using one of his shadows. He quickly got his jacket off, knowing Toga would want it anyway. Izuku looked up and saw shadows arguing in Toga's window. He saw Toga's hair bums on the smaller shadow. Izuku put the kickstand down, walked up to the front gate, and jumped over it. He was ready to fight since he knew Toga's family treated her like a demon because of her quirk. He looked back up and saw a larger shadow land a slap on the smaller shadow. Izuku got set and jumped up to the window and smashed it. Izuku landed in the room and saw Toga holding her right cheek on her knees and her father standing above her. Izuku looked at the father, and he started to shake, scared of what could happen. Izuku has been on the news for taking down villains when they attacked him for his bike. He'd crippled 4 of them and nearly killed the last one with a powerful punch to the side of the head. Izuku-kun. Toga got up and rushed over to him, and he opened his arms. Toga quickly wrapped her arms around Izuku's chest, and he wrapped his right arm around her as she buried her head into his chest. Izuku frowned as he rubbed her back and looked at the father. Izuku smiled as he felt her double D cup pressed into his chest. Toga was 5'9" with a nice heart-shaped but with well-toned hips. She was dressed in black jeans with a pair of sneakers on. Her shirt was crimson red, with an image of black knives on her chest. Around her neck was the BLD red choker he'd bought her on their last date. Izuku watched the father as he quickly got out of the room. Once he was gone, Izuku smiled as he looked down at her. Izuku, knowing that the father may call the cops, he picked Toga up like a bride and jumped out of the window. He then jumped over the wall. Haha. Izuku smiled a little more as he heard Toga's happy laugh. He pulled his coat over her shoulder, and Toga quickly got the coat on right. Then he bit down on his tongue and pulled her into a deep kiss. Toga, tasting the BLD, as she closed her eyes. His BLD was helping with the craving for BLD that was starting. Toga wrapped her arms around his neck as she started to drink the BLD. Izuku picked her up by her hips, and they broke the kiss after a minute. A little BLD is coming from the corner of his mouth. Toga pulled his face close again and liked the BLD, thanks, I needed the BLD fix. Izuku nodded before he sat her down on the back of the bike. Izuku quickly got on and started up the bike. Toga got comfy and wrapped her arms around Izuku's chest. He started the bike, and Toga put her head on his right shoulder. So where are we hunting this time? Izuku laughed, knowing they were going to the black market again. You know we are going to the black market. I just wish the DMN government would give aid to quirks like yours. Toga smiled as she looked forward. Can we get another hotel room after the hunt? He kicked the kickstand back up and started before he started to drive. Izuku turned his head and looked at her face. Maybe, but Toga, you know you just graduated. Do you think we should be doing that right now? What happens if you... Toga quickly kissed the side of his lips with a sweet smile on her face. I don't care, we've been together for 2 years, and it'd be nice not to have you run off early in the morning so my parents don't find out. Besides, today should be safe, so you don't have to use a condom. Izuku laughed a little, then he gave her another kiss before he started to drive. They raced down the streets, and Toga rubbed her hands on Izuku's chest. She could feel his hard chest muscles, and she moved her hands lower and felt the set of abs hidden under his shirt. It had been well over 3 weeks since she saw them last. She moved a hand from his chest and moved it to her PP, and she felt her outer lip starting to get wet. She couldn't wait for Izuku to get her on her back. 1 hour later, Izuku pulled his sword from the female villain's chest and grabbed her by the hair as she tried to fall. BLD. More BLD. Toga ran over with a large jug Izuku had pulled out of his inventory, where he stored all of Toga's BLD. He did this as it cleaned all her BLD to keep her safe when she needed it. He'd long since explained his power to her after he saved her back when she was a first year. Izuku then sent his sword back and summoned Night Slayer. One of 2 daggers he only used to kill those knights in the dungeon boss. He hid it behind his back, and Toga looked up at him as the BLD slowed down from coming out. I ended up taking the kill anyways. I got you a gift. Toga didn't care about the kill, knowing her boyfriend had gotten her something again. He pulled Night Killer out from behind his back. Her eyes shined as she looked at the dagger. She also knew it must come from the shop he told her about. It's called Kink Killer. Toga looked at her new toy with a smile. She threw the body aside and quickly took the dagger to look it over. It was a sleek and deadly blade that was sharp and elegantly curved. The blade is crafted dark material that gleams with a sinister, almost otherworldly light. It exudes an aura of lethality and precision, making it clear that it is a weapon designed for deadly efficiency. The blade's edge is razor-sharp, honed to perfection for slicing through even the toughest armor. Its sharpness is emphasized by a faint, shimmering outline that suggests a supernatural enhancement. The hilt of the Night Killer is ergonomically designed for a perfect grip, allowing it to be wielded with maximum control and agility. It is wrapped in a dark, leather-like material that provides comfort and a non-slip surface during combat. The guard of the dagger is minimalist yet effective, designed to protect the wielder's hand from slipping onto the blade during intense fights. It is sleek and seamlessly integrated into the overall design of the weapon. The Night Killer has a dark and menacing aesthetic, reflecting its purpose as a weapon of assassination and precision. It combines elements of beauty and danger, making it both an awe-inspiring and fearsome sight. I love it. Toga threw her arms up and down a few times before Izuku grabbed the large jug and sent it into the inventory. He summoned a belt sheath for her, and she quickly sheathed the Night Slayer and put it on before jumping on Izuku. She wrapped her legs around Izuku's waist and pulled him into another kiss. Izuku grabbed her butt, holding her up as she assaulted his mouth. Izuku quickly broke the kiss and spoke. We need to go. Heroes will be coming soon. Toga groaned as she rubbed her thighs into his sides. Izuku made her get down as he re-summoned his bike. They quickly got on and started the bike. They rushed off to the closest hotel. They pulled up to a LVHTL 20 minutes later. Toga jumped off the back of the bike. She pulled out the small stack of cash Izuku kept in his jacket. Izuku got off his bike, took the key, and followed Toga into the hotel. Once inside, Toga quickly grabbed his shirt and pulled him to the elevator. I paid for a whole night, so I don't want to walk out of here tomorrow morning. Izuku laughed and saw a young mutant woman who looked like a wolf. She waved as she looked at him. Toga pulled him into the elevator, and Izuku slammed her into the wall as soon as the door closed. Izuku grabbed her wrist as he moved on her neck and dragged his canines on her skin. Toga's legs shook at the STMLTN. Izuku moved to her lips and pressed his body more into her as he started to kiss her. Toga was happy to let Izuku dominate her. Ding! Hearing that sound, Izuku pulled back, and Toga groaned as he pulled away. Izuku grabbed her hand and took the card from her hand. He looked down and saw the door number was 305. They rushed down to the door and Izuku opened the door. Izuku walked over to the bed and sat down as soon as they were in. Toga, knowing what he liked, slowly started to strp. Lemon Star. Izuku smiled as Toga threw his coat aside and reached for her shirt. Izuku wasn't surprised, as he knew she didn't like to wear bras. She then moved her hands along her body as she kicked off her sneakers. She unbuttoned her jeans, pulled them down, and removed her socks. She stood there with just her red and black lace thong. Izuku smiled as he stood and pulled his shirt off before Toga tackled him back onto the bed. After a little struggle, Izuku flipped them and held her down by her wrist, seeing the blush on her face. "Oh, I've waited for this." Izuku smiled as he leaned down and kissed her neck below the choker. He slowly started to work his way down her neck as he dragged his hands down her arms. Toga groaned as her legs moved around, loving how he was playing with her body. When he leaned back up, he saw her thong had a large wet spot on the center. He smiled as he pulled her thong off and saw her soaked outer lips. Izuku threw her thong to the side and looked back at Toga. He smiled as he ran a hand in her inner thigh. "I never get tired of seeing how appealing you are, Toga." Toga as Izuku moved his hand along her outer lips. She spread her legs to give Izuku more access to her flower. With his other hand, he undid his belt and got his briefs and boxers off. When Toga saw his 10-inch long, 2-inch wide beach break pop free, she smiled wide. Izuku grabbed her hips, pulled her down to the foot of the bed, and turned her onto her side. Izuku knew she loved this position the most. He lined up with her opening, and with a violent move, he rammed more than halfway in, and Toga screamed with a huge smile on her face. Her tongue fell out of her mouth, and Izuku knew she loved it when he was rough with her. Izuku smiled as he held her leg to his chest and leaned down as he started to move into her. He planted his other hand on the bed as he moved. Toga grabbed on Izuku's forearm as he moved. Harder, Izuku-kun. Izuku smiled as he pulled his arm free and wrapped it around her waist. Izuku picked her up and grabbed her butt. Toga wrapped her legs around Izuku's waist. She didn't even care if that was how he saw her. He was the only person who'd cared when she needed it most. Toga was happy just to let him use her as he wanted. Soon, Toga broke the kiss and screamed as she felt her body giving her pleasure. Izuku smiled as he kept moved into Toga. "Toga, I'm getting close." Izuku may be a killer and much more like a villain, but he still loved his bloody queen. Toga's only response was to tighten her hold on his waist. Not needing to hear anything, Toga pulled him into another deep kiss. Soon, Izuku couldn't hold it anymore, and he slammed her down one last time and came inside her. Toga screamed into the kiss, and Izuku just held her too tight to his body. Lemon and Izuku pulled up at Toga's house and kissed her as she got off the bike. Toga's legs wobbled a little, but she walked up the gate with a smile. But her smile dropped when her code didn't work. She tried again, but it still didn't work. Izuku, seeing her having trouble, got off his bike and walked over to the gate. Seeing her about to type in her code again, the speaker crackled to life. "Leave. Toga, you are 19 now, you and your future villain boyfriend aren't welcome here. We're having your stuff moved into a storage unit later today. We'll call once it's done, and you can go and get it all. You'll have a month to collect them before you lose them. We left you a bag of clothes and an extra key to the storage unit around back at the garage. Izuku and Toga were shocked, and Toga had tears forming in her eyes. Izuku on the other hand, was sad and moved to the gate. He pulled his right up and kicked it in before Toga stopped him. Izuku-kun, stop. If you break it down it will set off an alarm to call the cops. Izuku stopped, a set-off look on his face. He spit on the gate before Toga and Izuku got back on his back. He quickly pulled around the house, and Izuku's anger grew as he saw a trash bag with a key set on the top. Izuku quickly put the bag into his inventory, and Toga slipped the key into her pocket. Izuku growled as he looked at the house and planned payback for these affairs. Izuku drove them back to his and his mother's apartment. They walked in, and Inko was surprised to see Toga again. She hadn't seen her for a few weeks, and she saw that she had been crying. Being a mother before everything else, she got her hands out of the sink water and rushed over. Izuku sighed as his mother quickly took Toga over to the couch and the two started to talk. Izuku walked to his room and saw it had been cleaned. His queen-sized bed was made, and the weapons he'd usually keep on his desk or wall were straightened up. He sighed as he walked over to his closet and got his coat off. He put it away before he heard two sets of footsteps. Izuku. Izuku looked back to see his mother with Toga behind her. Yeah. Inko smiled as she looked at her son. You did the right thing bringing her home with you and not attacking the gate. We'll house her for the time being, even if she's girlfriend. I don't want you two going too crazy. I don't want any grandchildren until you're 18 at least. Izuku and Toga blushed as Izuku looked away from them. Izuku was a little annoyed that his plans for his mother wouldn't happen anymore. But his bloody queen needed this time so much more. Toga walked into his room, and Inko, knowing Toga needed him more than she did, walked away. Toga got onto Izuku's bed and laid her head on his pillows. Izuku smiled as he lay down and Toga quickly moved closer to him. She rested her head on his chest and wrapped an arm around his neck. Izuku huffed a laugh out as Toga used him as a body pillow. Deku the Shadow Monarch. To let everyone know, I will let Igris and any other boss shadow talk in this story. The week had gone by quickly, and Izuku liked waking up with Toga each morning. He found it nice to have someone to hold in his sleep. His mother had also found having another girl in the house nice. Toga would help with everything Inko asked and got a part-time job to help pay bills. Izuku and his mother had asked that she try to work from home, each knowing of her quirk and what would happen if she suddenly needed BLD. Warmed by their worry, Toga did just that and found a small data entry job. Now Izuku was dressed in the UA uniform without the tie and his coat open since it was too tight on his frame. It also showed off his tight white shirt. You could see the defined muscles. Oh my. Izuku looked back and saw Toga wearing shorts and a pink tank top beside the door. She was comfortable at home now, and he smiled as he walked over. He gave her a quick kiss before he grabbed his key and backpack. I'll be back by 4. Take care of my mom. I left a jug of BLD in the fridge for you. Tego smiled and kissed his cheek as he walked into the living room. He gave his mother a quick hug and then walked out the door. At UA the students looked around the ground since they didn't have to be in class until 8. In this large gathering of people was a group of 6 girls. These girls were the female students of Class 1A, Mina Ashido, Quirk Acid, Tsuyu Asuyai, Quirk Frog, Ochako Urarika, Quirk Zero Gravity, Kyoka Jiro, Quirk Earphones, Toru Hagakure, Quirk Invisibility, Yayorozu Momo, Quirk Creation. This group happily talked near the parking lot until the other students heard an engine roar. They all looked at the parking lot entrance and saw a larger man pulling in. But they were shocked to see he was wearing the UA uniform. The girls of 1A saw him pull into a parking spot nearby. They all blushed as they saw him up close, and they watched him as he got off the motorcycle. He was a massive 6'7" with such a great body, with his dark green hair pulled back into a ponytail. His eyes matched his hair, and he had a confident and strong look matching his build. Holy hottie! Oh, please, God, let him be in our class. Mina spoke up as she looked at Izuku with a little smirk. All the others had to agree as they looked at him. He was by far the best looking they'd seen all day. He looked their way, and all the girls around blushed as they looked at him. He had an air about him as he took his key and put it in his pocket. He then pulled his backpack from a side bag and turned. When they saw his chest, a few girls around started to drool as they could make out his abs and large chest and shoulder muscles, making her D-cup stand out a little more. She wanted to see if she could get his attention. As he got close, they heard him talking. Now, I just have to find class 1A. The group was happy to hear that. After hearing that, Mina quickly rushed forward, the others following her. But when they got close, they noticed a few fading scars on his face to add to his looks. One went across his left cheek, and another went down from his right cheek to his jaw. Then she froze as he looked down at her, and a small smile formed on his face as he looked at her. She blushed as she looked up at him, and he spoke softly, making all the girls around him blush. Sorry to bother you, but do you know where the 1A classroom is? Mina, still blushing, nodded as she looked at him. Why, we are in class 1A. Izuku smiled a little wider and nodded as he looked at her. Thanks, sweetheart. Mina's face was nearly neon red as she looked up at him. Izuku laughed a little as he looked at her face and decided to have a little fun with her. He stepped closer and patted her side shoulder, making her snap out of it. Careful, sweetheart, you shouldn't space out like that. She liked her lips, her nerves becoming shaken, and then nodded as she grabbed his arm. Follow me. Izuku laughed as he let her lead the way. The other girls of class 1A quickly followed after them. Other girls around them were jealous that class 1A got such a hot boy in their class. Soon, Mina had dragged Izuku into a classroom. There was the rest of his class in the room. You all know who they are. Soon, they were sitting down, and the girls tried to surround Izuku, making most boys look at him. But Izuku knew the looks the girls were giving him. They looked at him like he was eye candy, and he did have to admit they were hot. This also made him consider Toga's offer when they started dating. She'd offered to let him have side chicks if she approved of them. Toga had figured out he was a monster in his own right, and she understood she would always be his number one. So, she was happy to let him F another woman or woman as long as she stayed his number one. Izuku cleared his throat, getting all the girls' attention. He smiled as he spoke up. I just realized that we've been in this little group for almost an hour and I don't know any of your names. Be nice to have names, the names of such beauties. All the girls blushed, and they looked away. I'm Mina Ashido, my quirk is acid. She was a 5'6" woman with pink skin and hair with yellow horns. Her eyes were black with yellow pupils. Next was a girl with green hair and a tongue hanging out of her mouth. I'm Tsuyu Asuyai, quirk frog. She was a shorter girl, 5'4". With a relatively slender build and notably large hands. Her appearance is rather frog-like but still pretty. She has a wide mouth that dips down a little in the middle, just like a common frog, and oval-shaped eyes with large, black irises, their lower eyelashes visibly pronounced. Next to go was a brown-haired girl with permanent blush on her cheeks. I'm Ochako Uraraka, quirk 0 gravity. She was a short girl of 5'6" with a slender yet curvy figure, fair skin, and auburn hair with eyes that matched in color. She has perpetual pink blush marks on her cheeks, and her eyes are large and round with thick upper lashes, 2 more extended and more prominent ones on either side and fewer but more individually pronounced lower lashes. I'm Kyoka Jiro, quirk earphones. Kyoka is a petite 5'5", fair-skinned girl with a slender build. She has triangular onyx eyes with notably long lower eyelashes and small eyebrows. Her dark purple hair is chin-length, with an asymmetrical fringe with 2 reflections shaped like sound waves on either side. Her most prominent features are the flexible, plug-like earphone jacks hanging from each earlobe. They act like extra limbs that she can control and change their length if desired. She was the smallest, with a chest more on the size of a large triple C-up chest with a figure you'd see on most girls. Nothing stood out physically, but she had a good air around her. I'm Toru Hagakure, quirk invisibility. Toru is a reasonably short girl, the same as Kyoka, with a completely invisible body. She is only identifiable through held or worn objects, like clothing and accessories. But he could see there was a D-cup, but Izuku couldn't tell her hip size or butt. I'm Yaoyorozu Momo, quirk creation. Izuku looked at Momo. Izuku smiled at them, having long since mstred cheeking a girl out in just a few seconds. I'm Izuku Midoriya, quirk Shadow Monarch. They all looked at him, confused, until he raised his hand and waved it down. A blue-green screen appeared in the air. Level 42 HP 10980 STR 750 MP 3310 VIT 489 AGL 392 int 410 cents 900 Available points 18 Skills Level 5, Crushing Blow Level 4, Cutting Rush Level 6, Vital Strike Level 4, Fatal Strike Level 9, Mana Manipulation. All the girls looked at the screen, and Mina was the first to talk again. Your quirk works like a video game. So these are your levels, skills, and stats. Izuku nodded, having everyone's attention now, even the teacher who'd walked in and saw a quirk he'd never seen before. That's not the only thing I can do. Now that I can test this quirk to a real-world test, it won't hurt to show most of everything. Everyone watched as he went to punch the air, and to their shock, a BLD red sword appeared in his hand in a white flash of light. Then he changed it to a dagger, a hammer, a spear, and a bottle appeared in his hand. I also have recovery items and inventory space where I seem to have a limitless space. I have another set of skills, but I don't think it is safe to use them here. Everyone looked at him as he shared. The teacher cleared his throat. He decided the fear tactics wouldn't work, as the shock factor wasn't with him this time. Once he had all their attention, he spoke up. I'm Shota Aizawa, the pro-hero known as Eraserhead. Now, all of you go and get changed, then head to the training field. Izuku Midoriya, will you talk with me for a second? The rest of the class moved out, and the girls were the last to leave. Izuku smirked as he watched them all go. Soon, the only two left in the room were Izuku and Aizawa. Izuku hummed as he looked at him. Izuku walked over and looked down at him. Then, he activated his quirk as he looked at him. Try and use your quirk. Izuku, knowing his power, decided to laugh as he stood up. Aizawa did not know why he was laughing. Okay, I'll play your games. Then, to Aizawa's shock, Izuku summoned his favorite sword and leaned down to look into Aizawa's eyes. I know your game, Eraserhead. Trying to use fear to control or threats to make us act a certain way. Just know that games ends now because you're the weaker and less scary of the two of us. Izuku smiled as he said his piece, then stood back up and left the room. Aizawa watched him as he walked, a smile forming on his face as he looked at Izuku's back. This kid. Out of the training field, Izuku walked out last, dressed in a UA gym clothes with the zipper down, showing that he was still wearing the white shirt. Once on the field, he released his aura to see the other reaction. It had an NTMT response. He saw everyone going stiff, even Aizawa, as he walked up to them. And many noticed his eyes had turned from green to a purple, sending shivers of fear down the back of the men seeing the power in those eyes. But the girls felt excitement as they saw the power in his eyes. Especially as Suyai, her animal quirk, was driving her to get close to a strong male. It got worse as he stood beside her, and she could feel the power coming from him. She pushed her thighs together, trying to stop her body's reaction. Izuku, could you pull back on whatever you're doing? Izuku blinked, looked at Aizawa, and smiled as the power slowed and faded away. He laughed and rubbed the back of his head. Yeah, sorry, when I let my mind wander, I lose a little control, and my power flares up. Ever since I broke through level 30, my stats tripled, and when I heard the title Shadow Monarch, it just got harder to control. I'll hold tighter to the reins. Aizawa sweated a little as his body tried to recover from the fear he just felt. He was also quickly making plans since his quirk didn't work on Izuku's. He may need to form a response team if this kid decides one of his classmates is annoying him. Aizawa then looked at the rest of the class and saw two opposite responses. The boys looked terrified and were shaking in fear, and the girls were blushing and sweating. All of them were giving Izuku side glances with more than a few clenched fists. Then Aizawa noticed Asuyai and realized that her quirk was animal-like. Her face was a bright red, and she had a look of lust in her eyes as she tried to stare a hole in the ground. He also noticed her thighs ripping together, and Aizawa's eye twitched as he looked at the girl. If Izuku's grip on his reins loosened again or if his mind had wandered any long, the girls may have jumped on him. Then Azui raised her hand. "See, can I go to the bathroom?" Aizawa nodded and she thanked him before she quickly rushed off. Everyone watched her running, and Izuku noticed a small wet patch on the ground where she'd been standing. Izuku hummed as he had found the first of his prey at this school. Everyone waited for Asuyai to return, and Izuku walked over to a stone fence. Izuku sat down and leaned into it. He sighed before Aizawa spoke up. "Izuku, keep your mind on something. I don't want a repeat of what just happened." Izuku looked at him, and then a smile crossed his face. He stood up and cracked his knuckles as he looked at him. "How about a spar fight? I haven't been in a good fight for at least a month. Plus, the villain that attacked me was a wimp who didn't last 3 hits. Aizawa's eyes widened again, then narrowed, shocked one of his students was already fighting villains. "Who is this kid?" But Aizawa nodded, seeing a chance to see if he could do it. "Why not? But, let's try not to hurt each other too much." Izuku smiled as he threw a knife up in the air. Aizawa activated his quirk and glared at Izuku. Izuku smiled as he got into his melee stance. Aizawa saw his stance and smiled, seeing one of his students like to fight like he did. The knife landed, and they lunged at each other. Aizawa threw out his capture scarf at Izuku. Izuku smirked, then vanished, and the ground under the ground where he was destroyed, leaving a crater. Then Izuku reappeared beside Aizawa. Izuku slammed a punch into Aizawa's side, and Izuku used his weight. His fist sunk into Aizawa's side, and the force sent him across the field. But Aizawa managed to land and come to a sliding stop. He coughed as he grabbed his side and looked back up at Izuku. He couldn't believe a kid had just sent him flying. He was about to move, but Izuku again appeared before him. Aizawa couldn't fight back as Izuku started beating him around the field. All Aizawa could do was try and dodge or block the attacks. With the students, this is insane. Momo yelled as she watched the pro hero getting his butt kicked around by a student on the first day. But her mind then went back to what had happened not a few minutes ago. Then she felt that energy in the air again, but much stronger this time. Her body started heating up, and she bit her lower lip. What is going on? Momo turned around and froze as she looked at the number 1 hero, All Might and Asuyai, behind them. Momo turned back around and saw Aizawa flying through the air. He crashed back down, slid along the ground, and slammed his back into the school. Then she and all the other girls looked at Izuku and saw his eyes glowing purple, and he was untouched. He smiled as he punched the air a few more times, then did a roundhouse kick in their direction. A massive blast of wind slammed into them, and even All Might was caught off guard. All Might moved to stand in front of the students once the wind was gone. He then started walking towards Izuku, and Momo and the other girls watched, scared for Izuku. "Alright, young man, you've had your fun. Now, I saw this was a match." Aizawa agreed too, but you went too far. Izuku laughed as he looked at All Might. All Might readied himself in case Izuku decided he still wanted to fight. Izuku put his hands in his pockets, and his smile sent shivers up or down the people's spines. The girls were all blushing as their bodies reacted to the power and demps Izuku was giving off. Their instances started to scream as they recognized a male that had it all. The fitness and power to protect them, the presence to scare off any threat that did try to attack, and an attractive body. He was tall, strong, and handsome with scars that screamed he was a born fighter. Okay, I know when I've pushed a little too far, number one. But I wish it was Mirko who'd stepped in, a hero I could actually respect. Not some fool who thinks villains should be locked up instead of killed. A real hero who knows that not day is promised. That seemed to throw All Might off as the energy in the air faded away again. Izuku turned his back on All Might and summoned a weak-grade healing potion he'd purchased in the shop as he started to walk toward Aizawa. But, now I guess Eraserhead has my respect now too. He had the stones to stand up and fight me head on, not watch like a coward. Izuku stopped, kneeled, and lifted the barely conscious teacher by his shoulder. He popped the top and put the bottle to his mouth. Drink this slowly. Doing as he was told. Everyone watched as Aizawa's wounds healed, and he sat up with a green, goldish glow. Izuku helped him up to his feet, and Aizawa frowned as the bottle shattered into light. Izuku smiled as he patted Aizawa's shoulder. You've got my respect, and as long as it doesn't threaten mine or anybody else's life, I'll follow your rules and order without a complaint. Aizawa looked at Izuku for a few seconds, then laughed a little. Okay, Izuku, you're free to sit out for the rest of the class. I was going to test your and your class's quirks capabilities. But, I can tell you're the strongest of the first years. You may be even stronger than some of the second and third years. Izuku laughed and nodded, then walked past All Might, ignoring the number one. He sat down on the stone fence and looked at everyone. But the girl also noticed that he looked at Asuyai the longest. She blushed as she looked away from Izuku, not wanting to meet his gaze. Then he saw All Might looking at him. Izuku balled his fist as he looked at the number one. Izuku wanted a shadow like All Might in his army, but right now, he knew he had no chance of killing All Might, even with his elite Knight Igris. He knew he'd have to be at least level 80 to stand a chance at that feat. He looked back at the students as he watched his classmates but noticed All Might coming his way. Izuku was ready to pull Raisin's blade sword from the inventory. That was quite impressive, young man, and a dual quirk quiet. One that enhances your fighting abilities and then one that allows you to heal. Izuku hummed as he looked at him, keeping quiet, not wanting All Might's eyes even more on him. It would make it even harder for him to kill and take his shadow. All Might, leave the boy alone. I just got my butt kicked to earn the boy's respect. So I don't want you going and getting him riled back up. Izuku and All Might looked at Aizawa as the class went through the course. Izuku felt a little more respect for them. Aizawa then looked at Izuku. Izuku, you're free to go to what did you call them? A dungeon. Izuku smiled as everyone stopped to look at him. And here I thought this school would be only a little entertaining. I can clear an E-rank dungeon in about 30 minutes. Aizawa nodded as he looked at him. If you go now, then you should be out by the time we need to head back to the classroom. Izuku nodded, jumped up, and summoned an E-rank key and Raisin's blade. All Might jumped back, seeing the sword. Then I'll finish off the boss as fast as possible. Izuku raised the key into the air and turned it. In a flash of bright light, a large, bright blue portal opened in front of him. The key in his hand shattered as a strong wind came from the gate. Izuku smirked as he walked into the gate. Young man, wait. Izuku ignored All Might as the gate closed behind him. He smiled as he summoned Igris and rested his sword on his shoulder. Let's get this done, Igris. I have a group of girls to make weak at the knees. And, before we leave, I'm going to thin out the army. I think I'll only keep the 40 humanoid I have. Let's see, I think it was 20 knights, 13 mages and 7 assassins. I'll keep the villain too, but keep the hidden for a while. As you wish, my king. Izuku still hadn't gotten used to Ijir's echo-like voice. Izuku and Igris both started to run as a large group of goblins. If we run into one of those giant black wolf's bosses again, I'm so taking its shadow. It'd also be funny to see their face if I walked out with one. I will do my best to aid you, my king. 3 minutes later, everyone waited on Izuku, having already finished the tests and were waiting for the portal to reopen. Most of the school had come out after seeing the gate, and the teachers started panicking after he wasn't back in 30 minutes. Principal Nizu was already trying to find a way to explain to the mother why her son wasn't coming home. Just as he was about to leave the field, a bright light blinded everyone. Everyone looked back as Izuku came out with something following him. The second he was out in the open, all the teachers were ready to charge as a massive blue and black wolf-like beast followed him out. Its eyes burned with power. Then, to everyone's shock, Izuku looked back at the wolf. Lay down, spirit. To everyone's shock, the giant wolf did as Izuku ordered and laid down behind him. Izuku laughed as the wolf moved its head and nuzzled Izuku's arm and side of his chest. Izuku laughed as he reached up and patted the wolf's muzzle. The giant wolf's tail waged as Izuku ran his hand down its fur. Izuku. Izuku looked over and saw Aizawa walking up to him. Yeah. Aizawa didn't fail to notice the wolf was watching him but showed no sign of aggression. The other teacher, seeing that, also approached some of the students and walked towards him. Aizawa spoke as he pointed to the large wolf. Is that thing safe? Izuku laughed before he spoke up while petting his wolf. She's tame and won't attack unless I give the order. She just became a new member of my shadow army. Aizawa hummed as he looked at him. Shadow army. Izuku froze, realizing he had just up but knew he couldn't get away with it now. Izuku sighed before he leaned back into his she-wolf. When I hit level 40, I went through something called a class change dungeon that allowed me to become a necromancer. Then my class evolved into the Shadow Monarch after defeating an A-rank night monster that I added to my shadow army. DMN thing nearly killed me when we fought. Izuku then pointed to his face. He's the one that gave me the scars on my face. I nearly lost me head twice to him in that fight. Young man. Izuku looked down at some kind of animal as he walked up and held a paw up. Yes. I'm Principal Nizu. Now when you say necromancer, do you mean as in bring the dead back to life to fight for you? Izuku nodded a no to him. No, I gave up the necromancer class to take on the Shadow Monarch class. The Shadow Monarch can create armies of walking shadow corpses through elite shadow necromancy. It makes it even stronger once resurrected. My Shadow Monarch title has several other abilities, including enhanced physical abilities, like strength, speed, and regeneration, which are superhuman. Even if the Shadow Soldier's body is destroyed, it can reform and keep attacking. Detection can sense the presence and location of other beings, including humans and monsters. This ability helps me navigate dungeons and avoid threats. Camouflage or stealth can erase his shape, sound, spell, and aura. It's a lot like invisibility, and that's about all I know so far. My quirk also allows me to learn a seemingly endless number of skills and abilities, but Shadow Monarch is by far my strongest. Then there are the dungeon and the daily quest that help boost my stats, making me even more powerful. Everyone was frozen as they looked at him. The teacher and principal understood that if his quirk allowed him to do all that, his potential growth was basically endless. Hey Izuku. If you have an army, can we see them ribbit? Izuku looked at Asuyai and decided this would help him get her later. Sure, I don't see why not. Izuku slammed his hand on the ground, and two massive dark portals formed in the group. Armored shadow knights, mages, and assassins all rose, with one standing out more than the other. The strongest of them all right now is Igris. He is that tall shadow soldier taking the appearance of a knight commander. He's the dark and purple color due to being a shadow revived by the power of the Shadow Monarch. He was an elite dungeon boss and is the one who nearly killed me about a year ago. Once the shadow on the ground faded away, everyone rushed forward. They touched the foot soldiers, but everyone jumped away as Igris moved and approached Izuku, sword in hand. Once he stood before him, Igris kneeled and laid his sword on the ground. He bowed his head to Izuku. "My king, what are our orders?" Everyone was shocked when they heard a shadow-looking knight talking. The teachers were also scared, as they'd never had a student who could fight them all at once if he wanted to. See, can I ask something?" Izuku looked over to Ochako as she spoke in a shaky voice. "Sure." She pointed to Igris and spoke again. "Just how strong is Knight if he's the strongest? And how do you compare to him now?" Well. He got a power boost when he became one of my soldiers. Let me think. He was an A rank, so I would put him at a solid S rank now if I compared him to our current top 10 heroes. Izuku crossed his arms as though he sat there for a minute. I guess Igris, if I gave the order to hold back, could easily defeat all the top heroes in 20 minutes except All Might. It takes Igris 3 hours to defeat All Might with all his enhanced abilities. As for myself, I'm just a bit stronger than Igris given I beat him, but I can't stand up to the top 3s I am now given I lack the Shadow Soldier's abilities. Izuku was lying, but they got to give them some hope. That sent a shiver of fear. Now, even All Might looked at Igris and Izuku with an apprehensive look. Aizawa then asked a question he had thought of. Izuku, what happens if you die?" Izuku hummed as he shrugged. "Don't know, but I guess it's one of two things. My shadows would vanish, or they may run wild if I die in a dungeon. With my soldiers in this world, I seriously doubt there is a foe that could overpower me and Igris if we fought together, not to mention the rest of my soldiers and those I can gather from dungeons. But, then I need to think about my leveling system too. I don't know if I have a cap or if my shadows can level up or evolve like some monsters do in games." "I see, Izuku, I think your quirk is a super mutation quirk." Izuku looked at the principal as he looked at him with a glint in his eye. Izuku didn't like the look in his eyes. "Why do I not like that look in your eyes?" The mouse bear thing smiled as he looked at Izuku. "Of the monster I have on my paws. I'll see to it you make an incredible hero." Izuku gulped as he swore he saw an evil smile on his face. Soldiers fall back to the shadow space. The king will run and hide from the crazy mouse thing. After saying that, Izuku jumped away. Nizu smiled as he watched the ground crater as he ran away at such an incredible speed. Nizu let out a crazed laugh as he watched a monster that looked like a boy run. Heroes chase that boy down and drag him back. School's not over yet. But many of them missed how the Class 1A girls watched Izuku running. End of the day. Izuku sighed as he walked out of the school, still said All Might had chased us down across 15 city blocks. Rib bit, "Izuku, can I talk to you?" Izuku hummed as he turned and looked at her. "What up, little lady?" Asuyai blushed as she looked up at him. Do you think you can give me a lift home? By the time I get to the train station, I'll have missed my train. I'd rather not have to wait an hour for the next one. I need to get home to make dinner for my little brother and sister." Izuku was surprised, as he figured he'd have to wait to get her on his bike. But he was glad to have the opportunity, as he did have a set of brainwashing artifacts in his inventory. "Well, what direction do I need to take you?" Rib bit, "My family lives in the east of Mizudafu." Izuku was surprised as he lived in the south of Mizudafu. "Well, DMN. I left in the south of Mizudafu, so sure I can give you a ride home, but you really shouldn't ride in a skirt." Azui nodded and pulled her shirt up a little. Izuku blushed as he saw some black shorts on. Izuku nodded, and they quickly walked over to his bike. Izuku had noticed all the other girls in the class watching them from a ground floor window. He saw a few with annoyed looks on their faces. Izuku, acting like he hadn't noticed, started the bike and drove out of the parking lot. While he drove, he slowly increased his power and soon felt Asuyai breathing into his back and moving her legs around. Izuku knew exactly what he was doing to her and hoped that he could get her alone for just a few minutes to get the necklace on her. Soon, she directed him to a nice-looking two-story house. Azui quickly got off the back and told him where to park and then come in. Izuku quickly did, and he followed the blushing Azui into the house. Azui pulled him to the living room, and Izuku saw two younger kids. A boy and girl looked much like Azui, with frog-like features and the same green hair. Ribbit, I'm home. Sammy there, Satsuki, we have a guest so be nice. I need to go and get changed. Azui quickly ran off, leaving Izuku with the two kids. He blinked as they looked, then put his hands in his pockets and leaned back against a wall. They waited there for a few minutes until Izuku heard footsteps again. Then, the little girl, Satsuki Izuku's guest, spoke up with a smirk as her sister stepped off the last step. Are you our big sister boyfriend? Satsuki. Azui was bright red now, and Izuku laughed a little as he looked at her and then back at the little girl. No honey, I'm not, thought she is very pretty. Azui started to turn neon red and then rushed off to the kitchen. Izuku and the kids laughed as she ribbited in the kitchen. Izuku nodded, then looked at the kids and pulled out some cash. He walked over and held it out to the boy. Can you go to the store by yourselves? They nodded as they looked up at him. Yeah, there is a small convent store just around the corner. If we take our bike it takes about 20 minutes. Izuku smiled and spoke. Go get some treats, I think we tortured your sister enough. They laughed and then made kissy faces as they looked at him. Then Samidare smiled as they got up from the small table. Don't go to crazy. Izuku laughed as they rushed to the door. Once she heard the door close, she entered the kitchen and saw Azui trying to focus on cooking. Izuku, knowing he was close to making her break, walked up beside her and put a hand on her shoulder. She jumped, and her face was still red. He knew she'd heard him talking to the kids and decided to talk to her before he pulled the necklace. You can relax, Azui. I'm not someone who do anything to anyone they don't want. Azui seemed to calm down a little and she turned and looked at him. Well, at least you're nice to my siblings. Izuku nodded as he leaned against the counter. Yeah, I really don't mind kids as long as they don't throw stuff at me. Azui laughed a little as she turned back and started to cut the veggies again. If you meet Samidare a few years ago, you'd be dodging toy cars. Izuku smirked, then decided to start his attack. So, Azui, why did you let me into your home on the first day you met me? Azui stopped, and then he saw her thighs rubbing together again before she turned back around. She was still blushing as she looked at him, and she looked away. Ribbit, well, I like how your power makes me feel. Izuku wasn't expecting that response. He blinked and then nodded as he looked at her. Well, the way you and the other reacted, I thought it was a fear response. I mean that how the monsters in the dungeon react when my power flares. Azui blushed as she spoke. Well, that's not how it makes me feel. I would like to nice if we could hang out more. Izuku, seeing his chance, summoned a necklace. The chain was made of bronze with a large green gem. It was a small one that most women would love to get from a man. If that's what you want, then wear this. It will allow you to talk to me through my shadows. It's also an artifact with a B-rank cold blocking effect. Azui looked at the necklace, blushing, and then turned and moved her hair out of the way. Izuku smiled as he walked over, and once the necklace was won, Azui's body went stiff before her eyes became dead as she stood there. Izuku was happy to have a chance to test this item finally. Azui, turn and face me. Azui did as she was told. He knew he just had to set conditions. Once that was done, the effect would be permanent even if she or someone removed the necklace. She would act normal around everyone and nobody would see any difference in her acts or behavior. Let's see, I can set 3 rules that she'll follow no matter what. Izuku thought about it for a few minutes until he had what he wanted. First, Azui, you will always side with me and follow whatever I tell you without question. Second, you listen to my bloody queen Toga if she ever orders you to do something. Lastly, you will become one of my women and love me without question. Once Izuku was done, Ajui's eyes returned to normal, but she looked at Izuku with a loving gaze. Izuku-kun. Izuku smiled as he pulled her into a hug. He was well on his way to making his HRM. Deku the Shadow Monarch. The League of Villains will still exist. Nomu will also still be in the story, but with All for One, they will not be unlimited. 3 weeks later Izuku sighed as he walked around with Toga and Ajui. Toga was dressed in blue jeans shorts with a red tank top and her hair down. Ajui was dressed in some breathes with a black shirt on with one of Izuku's blue zip-up jackets. Both of them had on heels with sunglasses on their heads. After learning what he'd done, Toga demanded to meet the girls he'd wanted to bring into their relationship. It had been a long 2 weeks. He also hadn't got to Ajui yet. Her siblings were always home, or his mother hovered over her when he brought her home to meet Toga. Thankfully Toga was happy with Ajui. Izuku had nearly gone off just to find a woman to ribbit Izuku Toga look. Izuku snapped out of his thoughts and looked over and saw a clothes store with leather jackets. Izuku hummed as he and the girl walked over to the store. Well. I have the money plus you two need your own leather jackets for riding with me. Toga and Ajui both nodded and then rushed into the store. Izuku laughed as he nodded and walked into the store, not noticing the two girls watching them. Outside of the store Mina and Momo had been watching the three near an alleyway and wondering if Izuku was dating both girls. They quickly walked over to the large window and looked in. They saw Izuku looking at a jet black jacket with purple rings along the bicep and purple shoulder strips that connected in the middle of the back. Ajui had a dark green leather jacket, while the other girl had a bright crimson with a black heart on the back. When they all seemed to have found their jackets, they walked up to the counter. When Izuku pulled out a stack of cash, Mina's eyes widened while Momo thought maybe Izuku liked the rougher look on women. She'd have to make a jacket and leather briefs later. While thinking, Mina imagined Izuku with just a pair of jeans bare chest, and that jacket over his shoulder. Both girls were blushing before they saw them heading for the door. Both girls rushed off, hoping that they hadn't been seen. With Izuku and the girls Izuku smiled as his girls walked out with their new leather, and he smiled as he walked with his new jacket on. He'd seen Momo and Mina in the window but decided to let them think what they wanted. Soon, they'd be under his thumb like Ajui. Soon, they were done, and Izuku put Toga back on a train to head home for dinner while Izuku took Ajui home. But once they got there, Izuku noticed that the house seemed empty. "Where are you siblings, Ajui?" Ajui riveted as she took her new jacket off before specking. "My father is taking them to our grandparents on his side for the day. My mom should be asleep upstairs. She worked late last night." Izuku nodded and then went to leave, but Ajui grabbed his wrist. He turned, and Ajui pulled on his arm. Izuku just let her pull him along to the living room. Izuku was a little confused as she pushed him onto the couch and sat on his lap. The brainwashing artifact shouldn't be making her this bold. Was this who she was or was she just wanting the attention? Ajui grabbed Izuku's cheeks and started a soft kiss. Izuku decided it was just his love command taking over and wrapped his arms around her waist. He opened his mouth to deepen the kiss, and Ajui opened her mouth. Then, to his surprise, Ajui stuffed her into his mouth, completely dominating the kiss. But Izuku let her control the kiss as he moved his hands along her body, testing where she was sensitive to touch. Izuku then moved his hand to her butt and hiked her up a little higher up, and she wrapped her arms around his neck. Izuku couldn't help but start kneading her butt. Ajui into the kiss before she pulled his shirt up and ran her hands along his abs. Then they heard a surprised yelp. The two instantly broke apart, Ajui's tongue flying back into her mouth, and they looked at the steps. Mom, ribbit." Izuku pulled his shirt down while Ajui got off him. Izuku looked at her and saw she looked like an older version of Ajui but her mouth was wider. Izuku laughed as he stood up and bowed to her. Hello miss, sorry this is how we meet. The mother blushed, unable to believe what she had just walked in on. Her teenage daughter had not only brought a boy into the house, but the two were just a few minutes away from dry humping each other. Azui blushed and looked away before she rabbited a few more times. The mother cleared her throat after getting herself back under control. Once she had control, she spoke with an edge to her tone. You two sit down. Now. Izuku, having no will to fight her, did as she said and sat back on the couch. Azui sat away from Izuku, knowing the scolding was coming. Oh, and what a scolding they got. Izuku and Azui were shamed beyond words by the time she was done. Izuku had been told to leave the house and return with his parents tomorrow. But then Azui said all he had was a mother since his father abandoned them. Some steam seemed to be taken out of her scolding at the end. Now Izuku was riding back home glad Azui let him leave his motorcycle at her house. But now, his problem was his mother. She didn't know what his relationship with Toga and Azui was. He knew he had to do something and would likely use another brainwashing necklace. He would use one on her anyway and was even more annoyed now. He'd been blue-balled again, and he had enough of that. When Izuku was home, he summoned another necklace, which was a silver necklace with a dark blue gem in the centerpiece. Izuku quickly headed up to their apartment, and when he walked in, he stopped seeing Toga talking on the phone at the kitchen table while typing on a laptop he bought her to do her work. Thanks manager. Izuku smiled as he walked over and kissed her on the cheek. Toga smiled as she gave a quick kiss back before she ended the call and closed the laptop. She smiled as she stood up and gave a hug. So, where is our frog? I figured you'd bring her back with you again. Izuku laughed nervously before rubbing the back of his head. Well, her mom caught us making out. Toga laughed as she patted his chest a few times. Huh, I guess blue-balling you for so long didn't help. Before you ask, your mom had to go out since she's been looking for a car since the last big job you had. Your shadows do finally come in. She's also looking at the houses still since we could use a bigger place. I still can't believe you hired out your shadow soldiers as bodyguards after you revealed them at the school. Izuku laughed again as he picked her up and sat her at the table. Toga smiled as she wrapped her arms around his neck. No need to worry now that your shadows don't have to keep killing off low-level villains to make the extra cash. Plus, these CEOs and other government bigwigs are paying out for a nearly unstoppable guard. However, the heroes who normally take those jobs don't seem to be happy. I've had to have Igris fight off more than a few unhappy pros who've coming looking for these jobs. Toga laughed as she wrapped her legs around his waist. Well, you've earned a fun time while she's gone. Izuku smiled as she grabbed her by the hips and picked her up. Toga started laughing as Izuku rushed to the bedroom. Then, they were in the room, and Izuku made her get down. He decided to have fun by playing with her. Lemon Start Toga cupped Izuku's cheeks and jumped straight into a deep kiss. Izuku moved his hands back and grabbed Toga's butt, and kneaded her butt cheeks through her shorts. Toga as she felt Izuku's hands. He was being rougher than last time. Izuku broke the kiss, and Toga felt her thighs getting wet quickly got off Izuku and got her shorts and shirt off while Izuku stood and got his shirt off. Showing off a new scar on his shoulder with another smaller one over his six-pack. When he went for his belt, Toga grabbed his hands. Izuku, knowing what she was going to do, smiled. Izuku sat back down, and Toga undid his belt, button, and zipper. Time for the fun. Toga pulled his waistband down, and she smiled as Izuku's beach breaker popped free. Toga smiled as she moved her tips and spit down. As she did, she took Izuku's tip into her mouth, and Izuku as Toga played with the underside of his with her tongue. Izuku looked Toga in the eye, and she stopped moving her tips and then moved her head down. Izuku put a hand on her head as she took more than half of his pee into her mouth. Izuku again, and after a minute, Toga pulled his pee from her mouth. Izuku grabbed her arm and pulled her off her knees. Toga smiled as she slammed down onto the bed and had her butt up in the air. Izuku pulled her panties down, and before she could react, Izuku shoved both his middle and ring finger. Toga screamed with pleasure from how rough he was being. Izuku smiled as he started fingering her, making her squirm. Izuku smiled as Toga as her hips moved with each move of his hand. Then he pushed or pulled his fingers in while playing with her CLT with his thumb. Izuku knew Toga wasn't the biggest fan of FRPLY, but he knew how to make her wet and how to make her scream for him. When Izuku was sure she was wet enough, he pulled his fingers out of her before he grabbed her butt cheek. Izuku grabbed his and lined up with her opening. Izuku pushed the tip into her, and it slipped in, and he grabbed her other butt cheek before he rammed into her. Izuku could be both soft and rough. Toga's thoughts faded as two violent moves hammered her deeper into their bed. Toga buried her face into the pillow as she tried not to scream again, knowing that's what Izuku wanted. After a few more moves, Izuku grabbed her arm and flipped her. With her legs spread wider and Toga he grabbed her waist and pulled her up into his move. Izuku buried his PP deep into her before he wrapped his arms around Toga's waist and yanked her up. Toga yelped as Izuku grabbed her, but once her tips hit his chest, Toga quickly wrapped her arms around Izuku's neck and started another kiss. Izuku started bouncing Toga on his PP, and he held tight to her but as he moved into her. Izuku smiled as he felt her end coming on fast with how tight she was getting. Toga pulled him into a kiss as she came from the hard move of Izuku's hips. Izuku, without thinking about it, slammed into Toga and into the kiss as he came inside of her. Izuku broke the kiss and pressed his head to her forehead. Toga looked lovingly into Izuku's eyes. Soon, Izuku pulled out of her. But Izuku wasn't finished yet. He laid her down on the bed before pulling her to the bed's edge. He flipped her and forced her to stand. Izuku, wait a minute. Toga screamed again as Izuku rammed back into her. He planned to make her regret blue balling him for so long. Toga's arms gave out, and she grabbed the blanket. She held a fist full of the blanket and with each move of Izuku's hips. Izuku heard his door open a little and sensed his mother. Deciding if she wanted to sneak a peek, Izuku picked Toga up, and her back fell into Izuku's chest. And he moved up into her, giving his mother a good view from the door as he came into Toga again. Lemon and outside the room Inko looked on in shock at how rough Izuku was with Toga. Inko's left hand moved to her breathes, but she stopped and shook her head. She couldn't do that, with her son being what made her corny. But she couldn't help but feel a little envious of Toga. Inko walked away, her lower lips were begging for some attention. Inko was annoyed that Izuku was larger than that BSTRD who'd abandoned them when they both thought Izuku was quirkless. Inko stopped at her door and grabbed her crotched 2 hours. Izuku cracked his back as he entered the living room and found his mother sitting there. Izuku wasn't surprised when he saw the blush on her face. Izuku moved his hand behind his back. She resumed the necklace when she stood up and walked into the kitchen. He had to get this done and get Ajui's family dealt with. Izuku walked up behind his mother and then used 2 shadows to grab his mother, and before she could scream, he had the necklace around her neck. Her eyes went dead, and Izuku smiled. He used the same rules as he did for Ajui. Once she was back, Inko smiled and looked up at Izuku. "What's wrong, Izuku-kun?" Izuku smiled as now he at least had a chance to get off with just the scolding Ajui's mom gave him. He told her what happened, and Inko laughed it off, saying that teenagers will be teenagers. Next day Inko parked their new Toyota Yaris. Izuku saw Ajui in the window, looking down at them. He smiled and waved at her as he exited the car. She smiled, opened her window, and jumped out to his surprise. Izuku yelled her name, rushed forward, and caught her as she fell. Ajui smiled as she took Izuku to the ground, and the door flew open, showing a frog-like man, more so than the rest of his family, as he appeared to have the head of a brown toad. He is a tall, stocky, middle-aged man with black, short-cropped hair and black eyes. He wears a plain business suit with a blue-dotted tie. But Izuku paid high-not attention as he was checking over Azui. As he yelled, he got them both up. "Are you out of your mind?" Jumped down from the second floor. "You could have been hurt if I hadn't caught you." Azui just smiled as she looked up at Izuku. Izuku sighed as he held his forehead. Inko laughed into her hand as she looked at the scene before her, and the man's eye twitched. His daughter was known for jumping around and had jumped from her window a few times in middle school when her friends came over. The man sighed before he walked over and grabbed Azui's arm. "Azui, your mother and I told you to stay in your room." The toad man looked up when he realized how much bigger the boy was. He stood a chest and head taller than him and was built like a mountain. He had a few scars on his face, and he was looking back down at him with his glowing purple. The man felt a massive wave of fear wash over him, and he stepped back. "Ganma." Izuku smiled as he had the name of this F and his wife, who blocked him. Azui freed her arm, moved to Izuku's side, grabbed his arm, and started pulling him to the door. Izuku didn't fight her as she pulled him past her father, with Inko following them. Inko waved to Ganma as she followed Azui and Izuku into the house. Soon, Ganma pulled himself together and then followed them in. They all walked into the kitchen and sat down at the table. Inko and Izuku sat on one side while the Azui family sat on the other. Azui was happily looking at Izuku and Inko. At the same time, her mother and father looked at Izuku with some fear in their eyes. They had got his name last night and tried to look him up. He was a young man who'd taken on and beaten a collective of 20 villains before entering UA High. He'd crippled 9 of them, nearly killed 2 of them, and left another 9 hospitalized with broken limbs, with one having a cracked skull from a near-lethal blow to the head. He'd also taken on their homeroom teacher and won the fight. They were upset with their daughter but were impressed with the powerhouse their daughter had caught the attention of. Inko smiled before she spoke up. "So why did you have my son ask me to come here?" The 2 frog parents tapped back to reality, and Ganma spoke up with all the confidence he could muster, seeing the young man's smirk. "Well, my wife caught my daughter on top of your son, with them being rather handsy and making out." Inko blinked, looked between the 2 teens, and then at the Azui parents. "So, you 2 had me come here because 2 teenagers let their hormones get the better of their judgments. I mean, sure, it's not the best thing to in the world, but..." Were their clothes were still on? The mother nodded but had a blush on her face. "Well, yes. But, when I came down my daughter had her hands under your son's shirt. And he was, well, grpng my daughter's rear end." Inko turned to look at Izuku, who turned away with a blush on his face. Then, Inko looked at Azui and saw her blushing as she looked away, too. Her tongue was sticking out of her mouth as she stared at the wall. Inko sighed before she grabbed Izuku by the ear and spoke. "Izuku, while I'm fine with you, have a little fun. I don't any grandchild running around before graduation." Izuku nodded as he held his hands below his mother's arm. He had to make it look real, even if it didn't hurt. Inko let his ear go a second later, and Izuku muttered as he rubbed his ear. The Inko looked over at Azui, and Izuku knew his plan was about to start. "Now, for you young lady. I have to ask which of you start this." "That doesn't matter." Izuku's immediate deflection of the question got attention before Azui spoke up. Making everyone look at her. I pulled him to the couch and jumped on him, rib bit. All the adults looked at her. Then Ganma slammed his fist on the table and was about to start yelling at Azui before a sudden, powerful weight came crashing down on them all. The man's heart nearly stopped as his head wiped to look at Izuku. He saw Izuku's purple glowing eyes and swore he felt like he was looking at death itself. But the woman then quickly understood why Azui had been so quick to jump onto Izuku. But Miss Azui quickly shook her head, controlling herself before speaking up. "Stop whatever you're doing, young man. Izuku did as she wanted, and the weight vanished after a few seconds. Azui's mother sighed as she looked over at her daughter. You got a taste of his power, and your animalistic instincts reacted to that quirk's after effects. Izuku hummed and seemed interested in what she was talking about. Maybe this power must STMLT your mating instincts. The Azui woman blushed as they looked at Izuku. Although Izuku had guessed something like that was the case, he couldn't help but have some red on his cheeks. He coughed into his fist before he spoke up. All that aside, can we please get back on topic? Everyone nodded before Inko spoke up. Izuku is right, but we will be talking about this later. But for right now this is settled, but if you two still want to move forward then I think it be best that you not do it alone. And if your daughter is new to these instincts and Izuku activating his full quirk is the ISIS, then it seemed like this is a much simpler problem than we thought. The Azui parents nodded, both recognizing that Inko was right. Izuku's activated quirk, not realizing its effect on Tsuyu, who was new to her mating instincts. They'd also be sure to get her some BRTHCNTRL, with them being gone so often for work, they knew it would happen sooner or later. Tsuyu spoke up as she stood from her seat. I do still want to hang out with Izuku-kun. Plus, it's nice to get to ride on his bike and he's really nice to be around, ribbit. Izuku laughed as he nodded to that. True, my bike is fun to ride on and you're pretty good company as well, Azui. Call me Tsuyu. Izuku smiled and nodded as he and Inko stood up. All right, well, Tsuyu. I'll see you tomorrow, remember. We're going to the USJ. Tsuyu nodded as she looked at him. Ribbit, I know, and before you go, do you think we could go back to the leather shop after school? I want to have something added to my jacket. Yeah, I'll come and pick you up, and we'll head to school. I need to get there early anyway. Me and Eraserhead are going to see what items from the dungeons can be used by other. Tsuyu nodded before she moved around the table and then jumped into Izuku. She wrapped her arms around his chest in a bear hug. Snorted out a laugh as he patted her back. After a minute, Izuku tried to move back, but Tsuyu held him tight. Not, yet you're real warm. Izuku blushed as Tsuyu started pressing more of her body onto Izuku's. Her weight pushed Izuku back a little, and the father jumped up from his seat. Tsuyu, get off him already. Tsuyu glared back at her father, and he recoiled, knowing the look of a woman who knew what she wanted. Izuku laughed as he knew he wasn't going to get away easily. The next day Izuku sighed as he waited on the field after giving Tsuyu the slip. Once they had gotten to the shop, Tsuyu jumped on him again, and the owner had to ask them to take it outside. Then, he had to run once they got to the school as Tsuyu tried to pull him into an empty classroom. While he'd like to F her senselessly, you're here earlier than I expected. Izuku smiled as he looked over and saw Eraserhead with the principal. Izuku stood up and walked over to the two. Yeah, I came here early with Tsuyu since she needed a ride again. But, let's get to work. The two adults nodded as Izuku summoned an item in each hand. In his left hand was a halberd, and a potion bottle in his right. The halberd had a large black axe blade with a spear tip with a 5-inch spike on the back end of the axe. The body of the halberd was a deep red staff. Izuku threw them over to Eraser's head. When Eraser touched the halberd, it vanished and reappeared in Izuku's hand. But the bottle is in his hand. Izuku hummed as he spun the halberd, thinking as he stopped seeing the two move back. Sorry, I have the habit of spinning this thing when I have it out. The two nodded, and then Eraser threw the bottle back over. Izuku then summoned another weapon. It was a damaged iron sword he got from a goblin. Izuku threw it over to them. This time, the sword stayed in his hand. Izuku hummed as he looked at the sword in his hand. I wonder why you can hold a damaged weapon but not one I got through a reward. Eraserhead nodded, while Nizu climbed onto Iroh's shoulder and looked at the sword. Izuku smiled as he knew they could hold anything. He just didn't want them to think they could keep them to study them. It looked like a basic iron sword from the Middle Ages, but there were cracks up and down the blade. Nizu hummed before he looked over at the weapon in Izuku's hand. The boy was comfortable with it in his hand as it was a part of him. Then he watched as he summoned some armor. Eraser walked over, and Izuku took it from his hand. Then Izuku took both of them away before he summoned a ring. Izuku touched the ring this time, and a screen appeared above it. Ring of Rookie Fighter, Artifact Attack 15 Defense 20. Nizu and Eraser saw the screen, and both were happy that the artifact could boost a person. He took the ring, but it vanished a second later. Soon, Izuku put everything back into his inventory, and then Nizu jumped over and landed on Izuku's shoulder. Izuku smiled as Nizu sat down on his shoulder. "My boy, can you show me one of these dungeon keys I've been told about?" Izuku nodded and then summoned one of the E-rank keys. Nizu grabbed the key, and Izuku couldn't retake it with his system. Nizu looked at the key, seeing it looked like a key from the 16th century but was sky blue. Nizu hummed and then handed the key back to him. "My boy, what happens if you open one of these gates but don't close it?" Izuku hummed as he sent the key away. "Not sure. I've always cleared the dungeons I open, though I wish I had a higher ranking dungeon. The highest I have right now is a C-rank key. The higher the rank, the stronger the monsters I get to fight, and the fast I level up. Killing boss monsters wasn't easy at the start, but nowadays I haven't found a real challenge in the last month." Nizu hummed as he looked at Izuku and crossed his arms. "I see, so your quirk allows you to boost your stats after dungeon also. Seeing the scars on your face, I can guess that the damage you take in the dungeon is real, and that means you can die in the dungeons." "Yeah, it's been a while since I've been hurt in one." The two of them nodded as they all talked about his quirk, and Nizu had Izuku lift his shirt, showing off a few of the scars he'd gotten. Izuku had also noticed more than one of the teachers watching them. He also noticed Midnight with a camera in hand, taking photos while his shirt was up. His eye twitched as he summoned a set of knives and threw one at her camera. It slammed into her camera's lens. "No." Nizu laughed. He planned to make her do overtime for a week and make Izuku talk with Hounddog, as his quirk may be putting pressure on his mind. DMN, why couldn't a hero like Mirko be a teacher hero? Plus, she is a total beast with her do-or-die fighting style. I'd love the chance to take her on. Nizu and Eraser both took note of his words. Nizu quickly pulled out a phone and sent a quick text before Eraser said Izuku had to prepare for the USJ. Izuku nodded, and Nizu jumped down. Izuku rushed to the classroom to be with the rest of the class. Nizu and Eraser both watch Izuku as he ran to the UA building. "Nizu, can you see if you can get Mirko here?" After word got out about his quirk, the Hero Commission made it clear they wanted him as a hero. "If he turns on us with a shadow army, it will take every hero in the country, maybe the SDF, to take him on." Nizu nodded, understanding how big of a threat this young man could be if he turned on them. If what he had told them was true, his shadow soldiers were nearly invincible, and they didn't know how many of them he could gather. They didn't know how powerful he was, and they didn't know what his quirk would become as it grew more powerful. An hour later Izuku smiled as he walked out of the changing room. He'd equipped himself with the armor he'd been hiding in his inventory. It was a full set of B-ranked black knight armor with purple and blue edgings he'd been slowly buying from the shop. He'd finally gotten the whole set and left his helmet invisible, hiding the horned helmet. He also loved the stats that the armor added. Each piece of armor added a 10% boost to all his stats. Thankfully for him, he could make it so he was always wearing this gear from now on. Izuku then waved his hand down to summon his stats. Level 42 HP 12078 STR 825 MP 3641 Vit 540 AGL 432 Int 451 Sense 990 Available points 42 Skills Dash Level 7, Crushing Blow Level 6, Cutting Rush Level 9, Vital Strike Level 8, Fatal Strike Level 10, Mana Manipulation. Izuku smiled as he looked at his boosted stats, closed the screen, and summoned his new sword. He'd won in a dungeon boss fight from a giant green viper. It was a katana with a deep green blade with a black spine. The handle was black with a scale-like handle with a fawn-like butt. He decided to check its stats again. Nightmare Viper Katana B-rank attack 40 and 35 effects Venom level 5 critical hit damage x2. He held the sword by the handle and then sheathed it as he started to walk to the exit. Once he walked out, everyone looked at him and was shocked at his armor and the sword on his side. He waved one-handed to everyone as he walked over to his bike. Aizawa had given him persimmon to ride his bike to USJ. Ripped. Izuku laughed as he turned and saw Tsuyu in her skin-tight green and black outfit. She also had some goggles on the top of her head. Izuku laughed as he patted the back seat. Tsuyu smiled as she got on, and Izuku noticed a few other girls looked at Tsuyu with envy. But Aizawa got them on the bus, and they started to drive a minute later. Izuku followed behind the bus and saw Mina and Momo looking at him out of the back window. It took a good 20 minutes until they arrived at the USJ. When they went inside, met 13, and were around to get started, a black gate opened in the lower part of the USJ. Everyone looked at Izuku, but he nodded as he drew his sword. This wasn't his quirk. Everyone looked back and saw villains come out. Seeing that, Izuku, 13, and Aizawa quickly got in front of everyone. Aizawa looked at Izuku and knew his quirk would help a lot, plus, he was used to fighting, thanks to his quirk. Izuku, under my authority as a pro-hero. I permit you to use your quirk to its fullest and fight with us. Also, summon your army and have them surround the other students. Ida, I want you to run back to UA and get the teacher to come and help. After hearing that, Ida took off, and Izuku knelt and touched the ground. His shadow army formed around the others. Igris and Spirit took up positions on either side of Izuku. Alright. Infantry and mages, your job is to protect those behind you at all cost. Igris and Spirit, you're with me and Aizawa. Capture if possible, if not, put them down. Yes, my king. Spirit let out a short howl before Izuku and Aizawa jumped down to fight Igris and Spirit close behind. They started to rampage through the villains, and Izuku was slashing left and right while kicking or punching when someone got past the blade. As he moved forward, villains began to cough out BLD as they fell to the ground, the venom quickly taking effect. The wounds turned green where they were cut. Aizawa was erasing quirks and using his capture gear to wrap around multiple villains and slam them into each other or throwing them into the ground or light posts around the center. Urgis and Spirit covered Izuku's and Aizawa's backs, taking out villains who tried to get behind them. Soon, Izuku pushed into the center and Izuku looked at the group of three. Stander, there were two men. One was just a black mass, and the other was a tall man with hands fixed to his body and face. Then Izuku looked at the last one. It was a large black humanoid monster, standing taller than All Might, with a very muscular body with many scars. His brain is exposed on the top of his head while his large eyes surround it. He has a beak-like mouth with an array of sharp teeth. He was only wearing beige briefs and metal knee pads designed to resemble skulls. His feet and torso are left bare. What? A kid pushed through my party members. Izuku looked at the one with hands and then back at the monster. He widened his stance and then lunged at the monster. But as he got close, a black portal opened in front of him. Sorry, young man, but that Nomu isn't for you to fight. Before Izuku was through, he gave a new order to Igris and Spirit. Igris, Spirit, keep Aizawa and 13 alive. Izuku didn't hear their response as he slammed down on a boat. Izuku jumped back up and looked around. She watched as Tsuyu and the guy with ball on his head fell out. Izuku dropped his sword, caught Tsuyu, and let the guy hit the ground. Following them were two of his infantry. Tsuyu smiled as she looked up at Izuku. Thanks for the catch, Izuku-kun. Izuku nodded, then looked out over the water and saw villains filling it. He huffed before he looked at the edge of the water. Izuku saw Aizawa and his shadows fighting the monster. They were taking ground thanks to Igris taking the brunt of the attacks. Izuku nodded, a plan quickly forming in his head. What do we do? Izuku glared down at the guy. Coward. If they attack, we put them down. But right now, my priority is to get back over and deal with that monster. Shadows grab my sword and the small guy. We're jumping, hey, when we're in the air, throw a ton of your ball as you can into the water. The shadows quickly did as he said, and then they jumped. Izuku had summoned a dagged enhanced with a power wind spell. He threw it as hard as he could into the water. It blew a column of air, threw up, and vanished before it made a large whirlpool. Seeing the chance, the boy threw dozens of the purple ball into the water. Izuku smiled as he saw them getting sucked into the whirlpool. He noticed him being stuck together, and they bobbed in the water. Izuku and his shadows landed back on the ground, and Izuku set Kyusu down fast as he saw the other two looking their way. The sword threw him his sword, and Izuku gave an order. Shadows, defend these two. The two got ready, and Izuku started to rush them. A portal opened before him, but he was ready this time. Izuku used a dash, jumped to the side, and vanished in a speed burst. He reappeared beside the guy with hands, and in the blink of an eye, Izuku slashed him across the side. The man screamed and grabbed his wound. Shigaraki. The portal man grabbed him, then he opened another one. Nomu. Fall back. Izuku turned and watched the Nomu punch away Urgis before he rushed to a portal. Izuku, not wanting this thing to get away, slammed into its side and tried to stab it. But his sword couldn't penetrate the skin. But, as he was about to try again, a fist slammed into his gut and made him cough out blood before he threw across the USJ and floor and water before he slammed back into the boat. Izuku. Izuku heard Tsuyu yell, but he was stunned. He grabbed the side of the ship and then pulled himself free. He kicked off the boat and fell into the water. He tried to get his bearings back before he felt hands grab him. Soon, he was pulled back above water, and he took a deep breath. He saw Tsuyu's arms around him, and she swam hard to the edge of the water. But, as they got to the edge, a villain with an axe stood over them. Izuku grabbed Tsuyu and turned his back to the villain. Izuku pressed Tsuyu into this chest, knowing his armor could take the blow. But before it could fall, he heard gunshots. Blood hit the water, and Izuku looked back and saw the man falling to the side with his legs bleeding. Izuku grabbed the edge and pulled them out and saw the guy that was with them on the ground, bleeding from a chest wound. Izuku summoned 2 healing potions as he saw the heroes attacking the villains. Izuku quickly popped the top and made the guy drink the potion. His chest wound healed and he sat up as Eraser rushed over. Is everyone okay? They nodded as Izuku drank the other health potion. He threw the 2 bottles away as he stood up as the heroes took down the last of the villains. Hey Eraser, tell them to bring anyone wounded to me, I got plenty health potion to help. Eraser as he went to help the other with capturing the downed villains. Izuku sighed before he sheathed his sword. Tsuyu grabbed him and pulled him into a hug. Izuku laughed as he patted her back. He sighed, annoyed with his whole mess.